Good morning and welcome to another episode of On the Couch with Creatives, the show where we interview creative people, no matter what the industry. I'm Melanie Perry.
I'm Julie Hyde-Mew.
And this is On the Couch with Creatives. Fans and followers of our show will know by now that we're part of the Creatives Group, the private network for creative professionals everywhere. Together, we help you create at your best, connect you with like-minded individuals, and therefore help you to grow your creative business. That sounds like a good idea to you and you'd like to find out more? Please don't hesitate to reach out to us after the show. We'd be delighted to talk to you. But as I say, this is On the Couch. So Julie, who do we have on the couch today?
Well, today we are chatting to investigative journalist and podcaster Angela Walker. Now, Angie and I go back a few years. We've worked on Sky News together as news producers. She moved on to the BBC, but we've still stayed in touch. And she's now doing all sorts of things. But I'll let her tell you all about it herself. Let's get her on the couch. Hello, Angie. And of course, being a former colleague at Sky News, it's always lovely to see you pop up.
Great to see you too, Julie. Yeah, we had a blast at Sky, didn't we, doing our night shifts?
We did. I enjoyed the night shifts. I liked it. You know, you didn't have all the bosses around.
True.
You were basically your own boss during the nights. Anyway, so welcome to On the Couch with Creatives. And this is Melanie.
Hi, Melanie. Nice to see you.
And let's start off with you talking about how you got into journalism, why you got into journalism. How did you get your foot in the door?
Well, it's a funny story, really. I mean, I always loved writing stories, even from a young age. And I was going to university to study history and English. And whilst I was studying, I had a job at a motorcycle training school, and there was a change in the law, and someone from local radio station phoned up and they wanted my boss to go on radio and talk about this change in the law and how it would affect motorcyclists. And my boss didn't want to, and I said, well, I don't mind doing it, it's really good publicity. And so I became a guest first, and so I was interviewed for the local radio station. I thought, oh, I really enjoyed that. So I contacted them and said, would I be able to come to the radio station and help out? And they said, oh, yes, we have volunteers that help out on a Saturday. So I went along and I started working on the sports show, and the rest, as they say, is history. And before I knew it, I was working there every morning. Before I went to uni, I'd go and do a showbiz slot on the local radio. And then when I left uni, it just so happened that a job came up as a newsreader and reporter, and this was at Active FM in Romford. So I applied for the job and I got it. So I left uni and I walked straight into this brilliant job where I'd be news reporting 3 days out and about, news reading 2 days, and it was my dream job, and I've been a broadcaster ever since.
You know, people always say when, well, not always, but in most cases, a lot of journalists, TV presenters will say, make yourself available, you know, just get a foot in the door and say yes to everything and volunteer and make yourself absolutely indispensable. And the next minute you've got a full-time job and and it's the dream job. So it's interesting that your start also began like that, and then you just went on and you landed up in Russia, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. So I applied for a job at what then was a brand new TV channel called Russia Today. And I went for the interview in London, and it was the APTN building, so a really reputable news outfit. And I went for a job as a reporter, and I didn't hear anything. And I thought, oh, well, I didn't get the job. And then I got a phone call saying, well, you haven't got a job as a reporter. We'd like to offer you a job as an output editor, which was obviously much more senior than a reporter. So I was like, well, okay, when do I start? So I went off to Moscow and I worked at Russia Today for about 2 years. Now, in the beginning, we were integral in setting up that rolling news TV station. They didn't have anything like it in Russia. And it was really supposed to be the Russian viewpoint of what went on in the world in the English language. And it was brilliant, you know, setting it up and being involved in it from day one. But as time went on, it became more and more a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. And I was there during that period where Putin stepped aside because he'd run, I think, 3 terms in office. And by Russian law, he couldn't stand again. So Dmitry Medvedev was made president. And this was the period when I was there. And it felt like democracy was coming to Russia. But after a while, it became clear that this TV station I was involved with was really just turning into a mouthpiece. It wasn't the balanced journalism that it was when it started off. And I got quite uncomfortable about that. I wasn't in agreement with the way that they were reporting at all. There wasn't any balance. They were not covering stories that we should have been covering. For example, the poisoning of Litvinenko, which you'll remember. So I felt uncomfortable. So that's when I left and I came back to the UK and I started working at Sky News and the BBC News Channel. But I had an amazing time in Russia. It was fantastic. I travelled around the country and yeah, it was brilliant.
Have you been to Moscow, Melanie?
I haven't. It's not on one of my must-visit places. I'd
love to go. I'd love to go.
There are picnics that I'd like to see, but you know, there are certain places in the world that I really would love to see, and there are certain places that I'm not that bothered about. Do you? I don't mean that horribly, but it's not on my top 10 list of places I must go and see. But do you find, it's interesting you say about the news channel becoming a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. Don't you find that a lot of mainstream media is going that way? I have friends who've been journalists for years, and even in the UK mainstream media, a lot of my journalist friends were saying as long as 20 years back that they were not being able to report in the way that they used to, and they were being given much bigger dictates of what they could say and what they couldn't say.
I never came under pressure from anyone to report a story in a certain way. I always, you know, I've always been involved in original journalism, coming up with my own story ideas. I'll see a trend or something happening and I'll investigate it. And I can say hand on heart, I've never been told you can't report that, you can't do this. I can't speak for anyone else in any other organisation, but on a personal level, I've never been told by an editor, we can't cover this story. So I don't really know what other journalists find, but I've not really experienced that, to be honest.
Well, I've had experience working for a national broadcaster under an authoritarian government in South Africa. And let me tell you, there were some pretty scary moments. And I once had men in black suits and dark glasses, about 8 of them, standing behind me, watching every word I typed out. And I sat there and I thought, I can't believe what's happening. Because up until that point, I hadn't realized that there was that much government interference. But this had to do with the coup in Bophuthatswana. And at the time, and they wanted to make sure that their narrative went out. And it was really frightening. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. Anyway, enough about me. This is about you. So then you went to Sky News. Obviously, that's where we met. And you also worked for the BBC. And then you went on to BBC Oxford.
Yeah, so I got a job at BBC Oxford TV News as a video journalist, it was what I'd been working towards for such a long time. So when I was at BBC London, I was an item producer, and sometimes I was a programme producer. But what I really wanted to do was filming and reporting. So I got my boss there to send me on a training course, a camera skills course, and he said, Angie, everyone wants to be a reporter. And I said, well, just let me do the training course, and then if an opportunity arises. So of course, once I'd done the training course, I just kept saying yes to everything. They'd be like, oh, we haven't got a camera crew to go and do. So I go, I'll go. It's raining. I'll go. It's a Sunday. I'll go. I just kept putting myself forward to, and I did a lot of work at weekends just to get the skills, filming and editing. So when a video journalist job came up at Oxford, I just went for it and I got that job and it was brilliant. I was going out and about. So I'd be coming up with the news story, setting up the news story, going out, filming the interviews on my own, filming all the shots, going back to the newsroom, editing it, writing the script, presenting it, and it would go out on TV. And I just loved that whole process of taking ownership of a story and seeing it all the way through to broadcast. And I also did a lot of program producing. So, I'd be the editor in the newsroom who'd be setting the news agenda, delegating the reporters, sending them out here, there and everywhere. And, it was quite a small team at Oxford. So we were really tight knit. Everybody could do everything. Everyone pitched in. If you'd finished your story and your colleague was really overstretched, you would just hop in and give them a hand. It wasn't kind of like, oh, I've done my bit, off I'll go. So we were really like a family, really tight knit, and it was a small team. And but we achieved a lot given that there was not that many of us. So working there, it was it was a really good time for me. Yeah, I loved it.
I mean, they closed it down.
They closed it down, and I was so sad because, the BBC were making cuts. They wanted to save money. And I just feel like it was so short-sighted, and I'll stand by this, till my dying day. I feel like local journalism is democracy. These are the local reporters who go out, who go to the local council meetings, who we're part of our communities, and we're telling the stories of our communities. Now, it doesn't take a maths whiz to know that the fewer boots on the ground, the fewer grassroots local journalists we've got, the less opportunity there is for finding those stories and for telling them. So I think, we've seen it with local papers, we're seeing it with local TV and local radio. We're chipping away at journalism. There are less journalists, less people telling those stories, and less people holding power to account. And on a personal level, it was really sad because I loved that job and I loved that newsroom and I loved that team. But I think on a wider scale, it's a disaster for journalism and for democracy, and I'm really cross about it even now, actually. And also the way that they did it. I was on maternity leave on holiday when I saw on a WhatsApp group they were shutting that newsroom and I was losing my job. I didn't even get a phone call telling me, and that was very upsetting. And there was a big period between when they did say that the newsroom was closing and when it actually did close. It was more than a year that people were told, you're losing your job, the newsroom's closing. And when they did shut it down, they kept one reporter job open, and that's to cover Oxfordshire, Berkshire, Buckinghamshire. And the main news programme that covers that area is based in Southampton, and they do a great job, but really they're covering an absolutely huge area. And surely a place such as Oxford, which has got universities and tech, and there's so much going on in the area, there's Silverstone racetrack, there's just so much, so many people in that area and so many stories. And I feel like it's underserved now, unfortunately, and that's a big loss.
It is.
I could go on all day.
But you still are involved with investigative stories, investigative journalism, aren't you? I mean, you just went out on your own.
So after I left the BBC, I thought, well, what can I do which will enable me to carry on doing the job I love, which is meeting people and interviewing them and telling their stories. So I decided to set up my own podcast, Angela Walker in Conversation, which is a video podcast. I've got a YouTube channel. Also, it's available wherever you get your audio podcasts as well. And I interview people about underreported stories. So a lot of them are to do with things like, for example, the pelvic mesh scandal, the many, many women who've been injured by pelvic mesh operations that were supposed to help them. I did a lot of work on the contaminated blood inquiry. I've done some work on medical negligence. People who have died and the authorities are refusing to accept responsibility, even though the evidence is there. And most recently, I've just been involved in a podcast with TORTOISE Media, and it's an investigation into army suicides. And it was fascinating to work with TORTOISE, actually. And it's a highly produced podcast. And it's such an important story about the way that mental health is dealt with in the army. The podcast is called Sick Parade, a crisis at Catterick Garrison. And it's really a thorough investigation into the way that mental health is viewed in the army. And, it's 2024. You would think that there's things about having a stigma to do with mental health is in the past, but that is not what we found at all. And the number of soldiers, healthy young men taking their own lives was shocking. And so it's a really important piece of work that we've done, and an investigation that I'm really proud of being part of.
And we'll put the link to that particular story in the notes. And what top tips would you have for people who want to enter the world of journalism?
I would say follow your heart when it comes to storytelling. Always report on something that you feel passionate about, especially if you're going to do something in depth. You need to have a passion for that. Be persistent. It's a really tough industry, and it's not getting any easier because everyone thinks they're a journalist these days. So be persistent, set yourself targets, find the people that you need to contact to help you get your foot on the ladder, and contact them, and be versatile. When you're on a story, you might go out to report one thing, and while you're there, you find out that actually that's not the story that you thought it was, and the real story is something quite different. And so go with the flow. Be versatile.
Good advice there. I would add to that as well, to be tenacious and be sure of your facts, because you just touched on an important point there. With the birth of social media, and we've seen it all over Twitter with the Trump election, mainstream media versus social media. And I think that if you are going to go down the journalistic route, you need to make sure you have a certain amount of integrity, and make sure that you are reporting on the facts and get things as accurate as you can, and not fall foul of misinformation, because most
that used to be a given.
Are on social media rather than mainstream media.
Yeah, that used to be a given. When I started in journalism, nothing went out on air until we had 2, if not 3, verifiable sources. Now anybody just makes up any old thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, trust in journalists is at an all-time low. And people are confusing what they see on social media with news. And that is very frustrating for someone like myself.
Because people believe all sorts of things. We go down all sorts of rabbit holes now.
Yeah, and people share and share and share these stories until they feel like it's the truth, and it's not. And of course, talking about Twitter and social media, we've now got these sort of Twitter farms, in Russia, in China, and they are literally pumping out misinformation. So yeah, don't trust everything that you read on social media. It should go without saying, but unfortunately, if you keep being bombarded with it, and it's very much an echo chamber, if you keep following these accounts and reading this stuff, people do unfortunately start to believe that it's real. So we should always have our eye out to what is the source? Where has this story come from? Can it be verified, or is it just something that someone in a Twitter farm in Thailand has made up?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what tips do you have for podcasters? Because you now are a podcaster yourself, but you also help other people to become podcasters.
Yeah, I do. I do a lot of production. I help people set up their podcast. I've got some clients who do their own recording and then they send me the raw material and I edit it and add the music and so on. And I do a lot of training for people as well who want to get into podcasting or improve their skills. Like I do an interview skills training course. And my top tips would be consistent. Set yourself an agenda, a schedule that you can stick to. It's better to do one really good, highly produced podcast every fortnight than a poor one once a week. Be patient when it comes to followers and downloads. It really is a marathon and not a race. And when you make a podcast, you've got to promote it, because it's like writing a book and put it in the library and nobody knows it's there, and that's what podcasting is like. So that moves me on to my third point, which is repurpose your content. You can do a great podcast. It's like half an hour long. What are the highlights? Turn them into social media shorts, put them on Instagram, put them on YouTube shorts, put them on Facebook Reels, and then use those to point people towards the full length version, to point people towards your website. And it's just about reusing the content that you've already made.
Yeah. And that's what we do, don't we, Julie? So your top tips will be turned into YouTube shorts. They'll be going out on lots of our social media, reels and all that kind of stuff. But it's true, you have to, there's no point in beating yourself into the ground and stressing yourself out trying to come up with new stuff all the time when you've actually got gold that you can, batch up and repurpose and keep yourself going for years without having to stress yourself out about it, if you're smart about it.
Absolutely. And sometimes there are podcasts that I might have done 6 months ago. Say I did one on the housing crisis, and then they might become relevant once again because there might be a news link to do with housing. And so what I might do is rewrite the link to that and put that out again and say, here's a podcast I've done about housing. It's just as relevant now as it was 6 months ago. Take a look. And then you're reusing content instead of just leaving it languishing, making the most out of the work that you've already put into it.
Absolutely.
Well, I've got a gardener out there with a leaf blower, so I don't know if you can hear it. It's really loud my side.
We can't hear it.
Okay. Well, let's get on to the really fun bit. Let's get off the serious stuff and play around with you a bit, Angela. So Melanie is pulling out her magical cards and you're going to choose one and she's going to take you down a road. Just be aware this is not, you're not going to give right or wrong answers, okay? You're just going to answer whatever pops into their brain.
Could be dangerous.
Comes into your head, yeah. This is the on the couch part of the on the couch where we delve into your psyche. Nothing to worry about. Just a bit of fun. Right, I'll spread out my cards, make sure I don't drop them all over the floor, as I have done in the past. Okay, so I'm going to run my finger along the cards. Angela, you just yell stop when you want me to pick a card.
Stop.
Right, okay. Let's have a look. Ooh, this is quite a good one for you, actually. You picked. Protection of the environment.
Okay.
Now, again, that could be, environment as in the world. It could be environment as in journalistic environment, Depends on what environment you would like to talk about. But we're going to ask you creatively. So think about what environment means to you. And we're going to ask you creatively about protection of the environment. So first of all, what does protection of the environment mean to you? What does it look like? If you could physically see it, what would it look like to you?
Oh, if you could physically see it, I think it would be, and the first thing that springs to mind is a kingfisher, because we really need to be protecting our waterways, and they are dying because of the amount of sewage that corrupt water companies are pumping into it. And I've reported on this a few times, and it's just killing the wildlife. So a kingfisher is so bright and vibrant and full of life. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, a creature of the water and of the air.
Yeah, I like that. It's beautiful. I had a really vivid image of a kingfisher then. They are adorable birds, aren't they? They really are. What does it feel like to you?
What does it feel like? When I think about the environment at the moment, I feel suffocated, because the damage that we're doing with the fumes that we're pumping out, the sewage scum is literally suffocating the waters. And I feel like when we have these climate change deniers, they're like throwing a blanket over the issue. So for me, it feels like suffocation.
Interesting. What does it sound like?
It sounds like an aeroplane taking off. And I think that's because the loudness, that's how loud we should be shouting about our climate change problem. And also it kind of almost like personifies it, doesn't it? The visualization of the emissions coming out of an aeroplane. So yeah, that's what it sounds like, a huge jet engine drowning out the voices of people trying to protect the planet.
And that is so apt, because I lived in Datchet for a few years and was under a flight path from Heathrow. During the summer, when the Queen wasn't in her castle, they would come over Datchet, land and take off. And we would have a huge Boeing coming over the house every 1 minute and 15 seconds. And if you were in the garden during the summer, enjoying the summer in the garden, and talking to somebody, having a conversation, every 1 minute and 15 seconds, you had to stop talking for 30 seconds while they went over. And it was so loud. It was awful. So I can understand as a visual, that's great, but it's actually very true in real life. It's real reality. Real reality. That's a tautology, but yeah.
Well, Angela, it has been divine speaking to you this morning on the couch, and very, very interesting listening to the stories that you were reporting on and talking about. And I think it is very important that there are people like you who are giving voice to these stories that people wouldn't necessarily know about or even think about. So raising attention and raising awareness of these issues is vitally, vitally important. As well as keeping that journalistic integrity as well. So thank you for giving up your valuable time and spending it with us today on the couch.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.